Welcome to Network X. I'm your host this evening, Carl Chatsky, and the subject of our show tonight is a very serious subject. It's not a subject that we undertake lightly, and that is the case for impeachment. And let us not forget, in recent American history, Richard Nixon came very close to having a case of impeachment against him. Bill Clinton, for lying about sex, had a case for impeachment against him that moved ahead in the Congress. And there are many reasons, which we'll be talking about later on, that the current occupant of the White House, also his behavior calls out for impeachment. And we have with us today, very fortunately, two guests who are working and very knowledgeable on this issue. On my left is Dorli Rainey, who is a peace activist and a candidate for city council, and Toby Rodriguez, who is on her left, who is a homemaker and a member of Queen Anne Neighbors for Peace. And Dorli, you grew up in Austria.
Yes, I did.
Could you tell us some of the reasons why you came to this country and how you feel about some of those reasons right now?
Right at the end of the war, I worked in a displaced persons hospital, and the occupying forces asked me to become a translator for them. And so I worked with the Army for 10 years as technical translator and translated some of the big cases. I tried to get into the United States just about at the end of the war, but that wasn't possible yet. So several years later, then I got married and came over here. But I came over here not for what is promised as the land of milk and honey. I came because I am so interested in the Constitution. It's the best Constitution. It's a model for almost all countries. And I really feel that the Constitution has suffered greatly in the last 3 years. There have been problems before, but we have lost so many of our civil liberties, and the Constitution has been subverted from where we have 3 branches of government: the judicial, the executive, and the legislative. The election was one of the first cases that I really felt the Constitution was subverted, when the Supreme Court was coerced into ratifying an election, which really was not an election, it was a selection. And ever since then, our Constitution has suffered greatly. Our standing in the world has suffered. We have lost respect all over the world because we do not honor the treaties that we have. Kyoto is one. The Landmines Treaty is another. We are acting as blackmailers with the generic engineered foods for poor countries, where the blackmail is that we will not send any AIDS funds which have been promised to be sent to poor countries in Africa, without having those countries also take the genetically engineered corn, which they would take if the corn were ground. They will not take the seeds because they will get the contamination of their own food supply with the genetically engineered food. We need to start going back to where we honor our treaty rights, where we go with the Geneva Convention, where the Nuremberg trials clearly stated that you cannot say, I was doing my job, when you commit crimes against humanity. And so I really do feel that the only way that we can rectify what is going on right now is impeachment.
Now, you gave a list of really pretty severe behavior, which I don't think too many people can really approve of. And on that list, though, I think the one thing which is a clearly impeachable offense, and so I'd like to get to some of the other actual impeachable offenses, is not honoring treaties. And that is one of the offenses that people are saying is an impeachable offense. And are there any particular people that are focusing on that aspect on it rather than some of the other aspects?
Yes, both the impeachment petitions that go around, the one by Ramsey Clark and the one by Professor Boyle, state very clearly the impeachable offenses which involve Ashcroft and Cheney and the president. The Answer Coalition is working very hard on impeachment. The other offenses, as for instance going to war without approval by Congress, Constitution is very clear about who declares war. That lukewarm appeasement of the president where they voted for letting him plan on war, but he was supposed to have come back and ask for the Congress to go ahead, give the go-ahead on the war. He did not do that. He went unilaterally, attacked a country that has not attacked the United States.
Well, unfortunately, I think in recent history, we have quite a history. I think that we could say that same thing about going into the Vietnam War. Yeah. It was not a clear congressional mandate, and we went in there. So what I'm hearing from some of the people who have quite a bit of visibility in this country is specifically on the issue of lying about the reasons for going to war. It's that issue of lying. Isn't that one of the most clear impeachable offenses?
That is the gravamen of the issue recently, is the fact that there have been no weapons of mass destruction found in Iraq, that President Bush obtained the congressional resolution to go into Iraq, to attack Iraq, based on false information, that the United States presented evidence to the United Nations that was forged regarding the nuclear program that Saddam was allegedly trying to create in Iraq. They knew that the evidence was forged because the person who is supposed to have been the author of the document had retired 10 years prior. So it was not easy for these so-called professionals to have missed that fact. It's so brazen. This entire situation is brazen, and they have to account for what they've done. That is what people all over this country are asking for.
And in fact, it's interesting, that we try to be an alternative media here. There is not much media coverage, but around the world there is a lot of cognition of this fact, and Tony Blair as well is coming under criticism. So isn't the case that in other countries the press is much more clearer about these impeachable offenses than we're seeing in the media in the United States?
Oh, absolutely. The media have totally abandoned their original charter of informing the public. The media now have become entertainment. The educational part, I spoke to one of the media people in one of the big networks and was told, we're not in the business of education, and they've abdicated their charter. They should definitely be called upon to bring the truth, but they just don't do it. So if you really want to know the truth, you have to go on the web and seek out the different newspapers around the world.
And unfortunately, the media plays a large role in creating reality for many people. So yeah. I hope that these notions that we're talking about so far, and the fact that there was documentable lying, assertion one, and number two, that is an impeachable offense. because of the media coverage and the crisis management that the upper levels of government are now doing about this rising issue, people don't see it as reality. But in other countries, they really do, and the media in other countries is covering it much more.
Yes. That is a problem that we have in this country that we have to address. When NBC is owned by General Electric, was the war a giant infomercial since they manufacture weapons systems? They seem to have been promoting this war. Are they in a position of having to answer for their conduct? The media, various media outlets. The thing that I want to stress mostly is that the lying is absolutely the crux of the issue, but additionally, he defrauded the Senate and the Congress, and he's not allowed to under Title 18, Section 373 of the U.S. Code. He is not allowed to, the President of the United States, his cabinet are not allowed to defraud the Senate or the Congress, and particularly the rest of the world. He has defrauded us, apparently. And additionally, the thing that really makes me cringe is the fact that contracts were handed out prior to the attack on Iraq to corporate cronies to profit from this war. And that is something that is stunning and shocking and should shock everybody.
I was reading an article today or yesterday where I noticed that Jane Harman, who is the a Democrat in the House of Representatives, U.S. Congress, from Los Angeles, is raising the issue, not quite as strikingly as we might want to see, but she is raising the issue. She is one of the signers of the acts that gave him the power, or allegedly gave him the power to go into Iraq. And she says, I think we were misled, and she's demanding an investigation. That, in many ways, is a forerunner to the impeachment, because if in fact if he misled Congress, that is another very specific impeachable offense.
Yes. Yes.
Now, I understand that you have both had discussions with some, both by telephone in other places of the country and in this part of the country, conversations with elected officials who share this view that there have been impeachable offenses committed but have not gone public yet. And can you tell us how you think that's going to build and play as perhaps public awareness and support comes forth a little more?
The politicians that we've been in touch with would like to see a groundswell of support for impeachment coming from the people. If they get ahead of the people, the media will crush them. So if we demonstrate a massive outpouring of opposition to what has occurred in this country, and demand an investigation and demand that Mr. Bush account for what he's done, and demand that Congress open up impeachment process, they will become visible with their support. That's what we have been told.
Well, right now, with answer, there are at least 250,000 votes to impeach, and they have not counted all the mailed-in ballots. The 250,000 are just the ones that are electronically filed.
This is a survey that Answer is doing?
This is a petition. It has a form on votetoimpeach.com, and they are overwhelmed with people going online and voting to impeach online. We also have petitions that we carry that people sign, and I've personally gotten about 3,000 signed. It's the easiest petition to carry. I have never carried a petition where people actually stood in line to sign. And that is the groundswell that our elected officials do need to see, because they cannot just go ahead and say, well, let's just go with impeachment if the people are not behind. There were 2 congressmen who said that if there are enough petitions, signed petitions, they will bring the petitions to the floor of the House. Until that day, we still have to gather signatures to make that groundswell happen. So, and I think we will make it happen.
Now, you lived through the nightmare in Germany and Austria when Hitler came to power. And what similarities do you see, and what can you say from that experience in terms of urging people to become active based on what you're seeing is happening in this country now?
Well, there are several things. Number one, the people in Europe, or in Austria and Germany at least, were so complacent. They finally had jobs. There had been great joblessness because of the war and because of the separation of Austria from Hungary, Austro-Hungarian Empire, so that there was no more seaport, there were no more jobs. And when people got jobs, then they forgot to ever look up and see what happened. And I get the same feeling here. People are either so afraid that they're going to be next with joblessness, Boeing people. You need to look around. The layoffs are all over. But people are so afraid if they speak out, they too might lose their job or be called anti-patriotic, which is a dumb word. But so that's one thing. The people need to participate in their own government. And the other thing is we need to take the media back. The media will not inform the public, so the public just goes on merrily, well, go buy yourself a new car and do this and that will raise the economy. It will not raise the economy. So those 2 things that I saw in Germany, the totally managed press, there was only one kind of press, and that was run by Goebbels. You didn't know, if you lived on Queen Anne, you would have no clue what went on in Duval or down in Tacoma, because the press was so closely knit that the only news that we got was what Goebbels said you may hear. We see the same thing here. The news are managed by the big international conglomerates. They bring only the news they see fit to print. And people are going to have to start informing themselves about their government so they really can understand what is happening to them. I know when I grew up, we didn't know half the time what was going on next door, in the next town or in the next county. I see the same thing happening here, and it is frightening.
And also, can you tell us 2 questions I'd like to make sure that we cover before the time flies by, as it is flying by. What can you say about the relationship between the corporations and the government, as was in Germany at that time, as opposed to the relation of the corporations and the government in this country now? And the second thing, and maybe Toby would address this, a little background on the Bush family and their relationship to some of these issues historically.
All right, I'll take the first part. I'll take the Krupp factories, which, and Toby can explain then the relationship there, which used the concentration camp inmates as slaves for capital gains, obscene gains, based on the suffering of people in the concentration camps.
And you already see that, and I didn't mean to interrupt, but it just struck me, again, because one of the issues that's close to my heart is the fact that we have 2 million people incarcerated in this country today, and there's a lot of labor moves to the prisons for the labor to be done.
Yes, when you call up your help desk on any one of the internet things, you don't know if it's an inmate in Texas who is helping you. And that is slave labor. It does not do anything for the economy. It does not create jobs. But the Krupp family did this with the concentration camp inmates, and Toby can tell you who benefited from this.
Well, I wanted to talk about the prisons for half a second. The prison system is also being privatized. We have Wackenhut Prison Corp. And
Prison Corp of America.
That's right, and they're privatizing the prisons, and those prisons are looking at the prisoners as commodities. And they receive contracts from corporations to manufacture products from mattresses to computer chips. They're competing with labor. The corporations that the Bush family dealt with, Prescott Bush was
Who is the grandfather?
the grandfather of George Bush, the president. He was employed, he was a partner in Brown Brothers Harriman. And they were Hitler's bankers. People have to start reading about the history of the Bush family. They had business dealings with companies that, German companies that were Nazi-owned. And they financed the Nazi Party prior to the rise of Hitler in Germany. So they actually were more than just the money laundering facilitators for Nazi Germany and Hitler. They were people who put the Nazi Party in place.
And did Prescott Bush have a little problem at the end of the Second World War?
He did indeed. He was accused of trading with the enemy.
He was indicted.
He was indicted for trading with the enemy.
The Nazis.
The Nazis. And he went on to become a senator in the 50s when McCarthyism rose. That was not a coincidence. And his son became a congressman, George Herbert Walker Bush, and his son has now become president. So we have a very interesting family in positions of enormous power in this country.
And you know, unfortunately, we could talk for several more hours, but we only have a few more minutes left. So I'll just ask you both an open-ended question. How would you like to summarize? What important final messages would you like to give the viewers?
The most important message is to stop being complacent. Get out there and do something. We have to take back our country little job by little job. We have to take back the cities, the counties, the states.
Queen Anne Neighbors for Peace has gotten almost 6,000 signatures on our neighborhood impeachment sign-up sheets, and we are half a dozen gals and a few guys, men that are helping us. We're out there every week. We have friends all over the city helping us also, and we're going to present these petitions in September. We hope to go to Washington, D.C., and that's our effort. That's what we think we can do to help.
Do you have any events coming up that people should participate in? And maybe you can also mention your vigil with Women in Black.
I have been standing in vigil with the Women in Black since I think, well, it was raining and snowing, very cold when I started. I think it was January or February. This is a group that is nonpartisan and non-political, but they want to bring attention to the plight of the Palestinians right now. And they stand every Thursday at Westlake Center in a silent vigil. I'm also involved with being a CASA volunteer, which is a court-appointed special advocate for children to preserve children's rights in front of the court. I find this very rewarding. sometimes it's very scary because so many children fall into the cracks and nobody speaks for them. So, and I will have my kickoff party next Wednesday at 6 o'clock at Occidental Park.
Okay. So
Everybody is invited
okay, so you're having a kickoff for your...
for my campaign for city council.
and tell us again where and when that is.
It'll be at 6 o'clock at Occidental Park on July 9th.
Great.
Everybody is welcome.
Well, I'd like to thank Dorli Rainey and Toby Rodriguez for being our guests this evening. I think this has been a very informative show, and I think we've just touched on some of the critical issues at this critical moment of history. And we are Network X. We are a weekly show on news and some of the philosophy of what's going on in the world. And I would like to invite our viewers to please call us. And our phone number is 525-0087. Please give us a call so we know that you're out there.